This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, editor and publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. This week we'll say goodbye to 2014. What kind of year has it been for Lansing and for the state of Michigan? And what do we have to look forward to in 2015? To kick all that around, with me today are Kyle Malin from Mears, the Capital Newsletter. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Burl, for inviting me.
And Mickey Hurton, Associate Publisher, City Pulse.
Happy to be here.
And Belinda Thurston, Editor of City Pulse.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Kyle, let's start with you. How's the economy doing? How did it affect the gubernatorial election?
Well, I don't know if the economy really had as much of a factor in this race as maybe it has the last couple. If you look at the numbers, things have been trending upward, but on a very small slope. And so I don't know if it necessarily had the impact that one would expect in this governor's race. The fact that it was slowly moving up would show you that there were other factors, I think, in play in this gubernatorial election.
Such as?
Well, I think you got to look at the governor's accomplishments and whether you agreed with the direction that he was taking the state or not. Did you agree with the idea of cutting business taxes and then flattening out the income tax exemptions that people could claim? You know, retirees were a certain class of retirees no longer able to claim pension income. You look at people with kids no longer able to claim your kids on your exemption. Your charitable donations can no longer do that. But on the other hand, businesses were getting a cut. And so the question is was that worth it? Are we seeing the economic growth, and is that the direction that we need to take the state into? And are we doing right by education? That was the other question that came up. And so then we got into this whole side argument about whether we were cutting education or not, which I think turned into more of a mental distraction than it did, I think, than us ever really answering. It really is semantic. Yeah.
Mickey, your thoughts on how Michigan's doing?
Well, I mean, there really wasn't much enthusiasm, if you think about it, for an economic recovery. I mean, for a sitting governor, Snyder, hardly blew away the field. Schauer tried to make pensions an issue, but I don't know that ever really resonated with people. I mean, that he ever had any he could stick with. Michigan's economy is improving, and it's better than it was only because it was so bad. We're still relatively bad as far as the country, but it's like 7th worst for unemployment. And so there's still a lot to be done, and I don't think anyone has really been able to demonstrate that the tax cuts have brought new business to the state or right to work, the other issue that was supposed to raise Michigan to a new level. So it's a modest kind of recovery, but it was certainly, I think it was modest enough that Snyder managed to scoot by.
Belinda, you're both a journalist and a small businesswoman in the sense of running a small business.
Not a small woman. Okay.
And what's your sense of how the economy's doing?
I feel as though I see both ends of it, especially since my business is in Rio Town, and so in my backyard I have BWL as well as GM, and I can see the shift changes and see a bit of prosperity there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when it comes to the startups, it can be really rough, and trying to get feet in the door is really difficult. I've seen doors close and doors open, all around town. So I think I'm in the middle of it all. I can understand seeing a bit of prosperity. We are a car town, and we can see where money is going. I could certainly would love to see more investment in small businesses. And then we do have some wonderful success stories in small businesses also all around town. It's just still very difficult, especially if you are not very educated, if you don't have a lot of opportunity, already set up for you. The system can be very hard to navigate and to get ahead. So there's a lot of people who are holding, multiple jobs and patchworking an income together as opposed to a traditional, 9 to 5.
You know, as I go out though, when I go to stores in Christmas season, I've always asked them, "How are you doing?" You know, and generally speaking, the people are pretty optimistic this year. There was some slowness in October and part of November, but in the last month, businesses, I mean, just the ones you shop at, whether it's a food store or it's a clothing store or electronics, they're upbeat. This is a better year than last year.
I had to go to Meridian Mall Sunday. I broke my pledge to myself not to go there during the holiday season. It was as crazy as I feared it would be.
Yeah.
It really looked busy. Belinda, your small business, Just Be Yoga, is in Rio Town, and that's one of the pieces of the development puzzle. How is Rio Town doing today versus a year ago?
Well, versus a year ago, I guess I would rather say versus almost 2 years ago. We had to survive the reconstruction of Washington after all of the CSO work. So it was a desert land, and now we've seen a lot of development. We've got a new road, we've got a new sidewalk, we've got BWL's headquarters. We have a few new businesses down there, whether it's the Good Truck and Diner, the Vaudeville Theater, and Sedum is down there. And so we have a little bit more
And you've got
business traffic.
QD,
And
24 hours a day.
and we've got the church.
Yeah.
But getting a venue for a reason for people to come down to spend some time is, I think that would be a nice attraction if we could get something like that down in Rio Town. Whether it would be something that would be a club or a bar with music. We do have Rio Town Pub, but it's kind of small.
They need to develop that corner where the Deluxe Inn was.
Right.
When that happens, and they keep saying, development officials say, "Oh, we've got things lined up, keep holding." That could be a real entryway. That could entice people down that
Right.
down
But
that road.
there are a few new little thrift shops, little cute shops that are down there. But it'll take a while for it to follow along the line of an old town that had art galleries. But they also had, I guess, the real anchor had been the Creole that from that had sprung more of an arts community. So, we're getting to be a little bit better, but we need a reason for people to come down.
Mm-hmm. Mickey, one of the things I hear increasingly around town is IT businesses are booming in Lansing. And are you aware of that?
Not specifically, except that they seem to be advertising everywhere and
Looking for employees.
looking for employees because you've got the university, and that's a real magnet for that kind of talent, and it also churns it out. You've also got companies that really need that. I mean, I think a sector that's driving a lot of that is the insurance and financial sector.
J&L is adding on like 100 jobs.
They have almost 10,000 jobs now in just the insurance industry. That's, Jackson National, auto owners, accident fund. We are becoming a major hub, and they are huge consumers of IT type of services. And it's this part of the economy. It doesn't bubble up like the auto industry, but man, it's there and it's real strong.
Yeah, we can't ignore that we're getting fiber optic network internet in town right now as well by a new company called Lightspeed.
Not soon enough. Can't wait. Kyle, obviously the big story of the year was supposed to be the roads bill, but we don't really know the ending of that story. Why couldn't they make a decision?
First of all, I'm not convinced exactly that the road solution that they came up with was really the story of the year. I think actually the story of the year was the Detroit legislation and the grand bargain coming together and seeing Detroit emerge from bankruptcy when it was very skeptical whether they would. But we'll start with the roads here because that was what consumed everybody's attention there at the end and really sucked the oxygen out of the Capitol for about anything else. And, the reason why they ended up going to the ballot is because you have a conservative Republican majority in the House that didn't have a leader who was convinced we needed to raise gas taxes. That's really what it boiled down to. And the governor and his team didn't go in there and sell enough Republicans to convince them that we needed to sell the gas tax. And so what you had in these negotiations with the governor and the speaker and the majority leader were the Democrats and the governor and the Senate majority leader say, well, let's just raise the gas tax. It's simple, it's clean, we can get it over with. And you had a speaker say, no, Because you ain't got the votes, and I'll tell you don't. And we can go ahead and try and put this on the board if you want me to do that, but you aren't going to get 56 votes.
And what's going to happen next May if the voters turn it down?
Well, the next legislature is going to have to come up with a contingency plan of some sort, and they can go a couple different ways with that. They can do what the House decided we should do in the first place, which was to use projected revenue going forward, and saying, well, we're going to continue to have economic growth, and let's hope that happens, and we can use that growth for the roads.
That's exactly what Shower said about his economic plan, and the Republicans said, no way, not going to happen, can't do that.
Isn't that hilarious how that works?
Yes.
We can always project growth if we really need the growth, right?
Exactly.
So that's one way they can go about this, bro. The other way is they can present, if they really want this to pass, they should get together a very scary mix of cuts that would have to happen in order to get to $1 billion. Well, we're going to cut this, and we're going to cut that. So voters, if you go ahead and say no, this is what you're looking at. That's if they really want this to pass and they want this issue to go away, which I would believe that they really do want to go away.
The biggest surprise to me in the legislature this year was that this Religious Restoration Act did not pass because it's a conservative legislature. It's not different from federal law. 30 other states have it. What happened?
Well, I think that was just a shot at the LGBT community, just to be perfectly honest. Because Jace Bolger did want to move some type of Elliott Larson expansion to include gays and lesbians, but he felt like the transgendered community was already covered under federal law, and he didn't want to put that on the board because he didn't feel like he had the votes in his conservative caucus for transgender, just to be frank. He just didn't have the votes. So his thinking was, well, if they're already covered under federal law, then we really don't need to include them anyway, so let's just go ahead and do that. Well, the LGBT community, Equality Michigan, said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not splitting apart our community, so, shove it. So Bolger said, okay, well, if you don't want to do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm just going to do it to spite you. I'm going to move this this RFRA, this Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and I'm just going to show you I can do it. And that's what he did, and the Senate Majority Leader, Randy Richardville, who is not a super conservative by any stretch, said, I don't want to get involved in your back and forth and your tit for tat, and we're going to just shove this to the side. It was not a burning priority for him, and I didn't see him putting that up for a vote unless there was some major sticking point and he needed it for a bargaining chip.
I mean, this is just another one of those pieces of legislation in search of a problem that doesn't really exist. I mean, it's so overtly political, and it's just and distracting, and I don't know. I mean, it's just to me it shows it represents the worst instincts of our legislature, and they should work on the issue. They should work on roads. I mean, that's where you need it. That's where you need action.
Let's turn to some more local issues, if we can. Development. This has been an interesting year for development. There are things in the works for Red Cedar, but we don't really know how that's going to turn out. But certainly they took some steps forward. What else, Mickey?
Knapp's building.
Yeah, the Knapp's building, exactly.
I mean, that's been, how long has that been? Ever since I've got to town.
The 80s.
And they used to have, weeds growing on the awnings and all. So right now it's a gorgeous building, and it really is one of the it's an anchor for downtown. You got the accident fund on one end, Knapp's on the other. And I think it's illustrative of the economic development that's happening in Lansing. I mean, the GDP here is in the Lansing region, is one of the strongest in the state. And Bob Tresice, who runs LEAP, is sort of tongue-in-cheek talks about how well Lansing is doing, the Lansing area versus Ann Arbor, playing off that, our natural football and basketball rivalries. But it really is true. And as development is good growth and, jobs growth and projects everywhere. I mean, whether it's
the
marketplace or the ballpark, now the outfield is going, and it's just even the one we had yesterday, the YMCA development happening there. Mm-hmm. Lansing is really, and you got to give Bonero some credit on this. I mean, big vision stuff. I mean, sometimes he's, wavers on the details, but he gets it out there and puts it in play, and a lot of it has been happening.
Yeah,
And come next year, the Red Cedar project supposedly will break ground. Although they're talking about next fall, so that could easily end up being 2016.
Jackson National, 1,000 jobs with an average salary of $76,000, according to LEAP. I mean, that is big time stuff, and it's out by Okemos, but it's a 425 agreement, so it really is part of the city, spreading itself out.
Well, that's families that, buying homes. That's, people coming into our school system. Those are customers into all the stores.
Yeah.
And supposedly it should be a better year for GM. It hasn't been a bad year, but we're going to be looking, I think, at the Camaro coming to Lansing next year.
And then you've got the FRIB continues to evolve, and it was fully funded this year, which, the past years it's been down to the wire. Will they get us the money? Won't they? How much will they cut? Now it seems like we've gotten over that hump and, get it up and going.
So economic policies are working for Lansing, or are they working despite state policies?
I think that these things are kind of independent of one another. If you look at community per community, I think it speaks more about the leadership and the people in these areas. I mentioned the city of Detroit, for instance, and they've got a new leader there who seems a bit more serious about cleaning house. So I think it just depends on if the playing field is ripe if somebody wants to take that next step, if there's a city or a community. And I think right now here in Lansing, I think you're seeing the momentum going in a forward direction.
We saw the governor assert himself in the Detroit situation. Clearly, that must have made a difference.
Well, I think it absolutely did, and it wasn't just the governor, but the legislature decided they were not going to play politics with Detroit this year. I thought that was really the biggest statement too. When the state gave the city of Detroit this grand bargain, this pot of money, $195 million. For the Republican legislature to do that is really pretty amazing, and to do it without kicking and screaming and making this a political fuss, because there are people back in their communities saying, we don't want to give any money to Detroit. Why is our money going to Detroit? Why should we bail out Detroit? This is just a bailout, right? But to sell this back home and to take whatever slings and arrows that they were going to face and say, you know what, this state in general is not going to make it to that next step if we can't help Detroit out. We all recognize that they have a problem. We're in a very tight situation right here where we've got to see them improve. So this is the deal on the table, and if we don't take it, we could be sitting here for years to watch them agonizing over how they're going to get out of bankruptcy. And enough people did it and signed up, and now they just actually the state just released their payment yesterday to this grand bargain.
Yeah. Another interesting, when you look at the trends that are happening, it's health insurance too. I mean, Snyder stepped out on that, and he decided, we're going to allow, Medicaid expansion, and we have it. I mean, we have generally
made a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, we should have a healthier population, which is also encouraged. It's it's fundamentals, and it's just, the foundations for what we do. But that's, I think another one of his accomplishments that he sort of ran on.
Well, what's interesting too is that the numbers for this expanded Medicaid program are way over what they expected. They were thinking 300,000. We may get 500,000, or 500,000, 500,000. Yeah, I did my math right, even though I'm a journalist. Within the first year, we're approaching that number.
That's
so
amazing.
That's a heck of a growth. And that is again with Republican leadership. Thinking, even though we have a political issue here in the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, and do we really want to participate, what we've seen is the states that have not taken advantage of Medicaid expansion are still paying for it. You're still paying for these poor folks through your emergency rooms and your insurance rates, whereas here in Michigan now they're signed up for a federal health care program, and they're starting to get health care, and their care is now being paid for.
Let's talk a little politics. Obviously, it was a major election year in that all the legislature was up, and the governor, a couple of statewide elections, a federal election for Senate. Kyle, did much change?
No, nothing much changed at all. Because if you look at it, the U.S. Senate is now going to be going to Gary Peters instead of Carl Levin. So a Democrat for a Democrat, a pragmatic Democrat, I would argue, for another pragmatic Democrat. The governor's office didn't change. Attorney General, Secretary of State, Supreme Court, the same majority on the Supreme Court exists. The Republican legislature moved a little bit, but we still have a supermajority Republican legislature in the Senate. We still have a majority Republican legislature in the House. And so in that regard, we didn't really see much of anything. And then, if you even just go down to our local level here, we have the same representatives, and Andy Shore and Sam Singh and Tom Cochran and Tom Leonard. I guess you can say over here in Eaton County, Teresa Abed lost, so that was a change. Tom Barrett will be the new representative over there.
So maybe it's a little more conservative, but not far.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Not much more.
I mean, maybe, but
they didn't have much, much power anyway. I mean, Sam and Andy Shore and Cochran. I mean, they were still just pretty much sidelined. So I don't know.
Now we've got, though, on the scene a new state senator, Curtis Hertel. What do you think of Curtis?
Well, I think Curtis Hertel is going to be a very good senator. I mean, he's already gotten himself into the leadership group there, with Jim Ananek being the leader of the Senate. And I see him making a lot of impact. He's somebody who I think can work with Republicans and trying to get something done. I mean, I think that the Democrats this year in the Senate in particular are going to be a bit more pragmatic as far as trying to get something, trying to get even a quarter of a loaf, as opposed to getting no loaf but screaming and making a big scene about getting no loaf, if you know what I mean. And
I think, see an issue that they can get some leverage on?
Yeah, I do. I think, I think one of the first issues we're going to have right out of the box is no-fault insurance debate, and reforming no-fault. And I think we're already starting to see some compromise on that particular issue in how our car insurance works, and this catastrophic claims association, these great benefits we get if we get into a car accident and we're basically a vegetable or a quadriplegic or something of that nature, something very horrid.
Yeah.
This fund obviously is the only one of its kind in the entire country, and its financial stability is of question. And the governor,
its financial background is a question too. I mean, you can't really get too much information about it. They think you can, but it's not there.
And I think the Democrats have an opportunity there to try and make the best out of the situation, try and get some transparency on that board, and try and get it so the public at least has a better idea of what kind of inflow and outflow that we're getting and the cost of things, as opposed to just counting on the insurance companies saying, well, trust us, it's really bad. Okay, well, can we show us the proof? Well, we've got a website. Well, your website doesn't show everything. Well, that's all we're going to show you. Oh, okay.
And the court agreeing.
Yeah, right, and the court agreeing, right. So I think they will have some leverage they can bring to the table on that issue.
All right, let's turn to what City Pulse will declare next week as the story of the year, which is race relations. Belinda, why is that our story of the year?
Well, certainly the heat of all of the issues at the end of the year are what have amplified the focus on race relations and race issues in the wake of the non-indictment in Ferguson and the non-indictment in New York in the Eric Garner case. But if you look across all 12 months, we've certainly had issues, whether it was in regards to immigration or looking at police relationships with people of color. So it seemed a good opportunity to, we're going to take a look at how were we communicating with each other as a community when you start to look at the firestorm of reaction of people in response to protests. Why are they protesting? What is the issue? I think that we've arrived at a point where we all need to start to speak honestly with one another about what we believe instead of not talking about it. The city had a town hall meeting, what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago. What was interesting, it was, people were talking about policies and relationships with police and relationships within our schools, but that they don't want to necessarily have just a meeting and then walk away. So I think that everyone is ready now to start to find ways to engage in one another and really have conversations that we have together and then acknowledge the conversations that we have when we go back home. And are we saying the same thing to one another, or are we saying something publicly and then going home and saying, I really don't understand what those people want? So hopefully,
And it is those people.
and hopefully we can start to kickstart this as a community conversation, whether it's about our relationship as people of color, as Hispanics, as African Americans, as refugees. How do we perceive one another? How do we treat one another? What does the data show? What does the data not show? And how does that then start to be reflected better in our policy, in our administrations, and how we treat one another?
Mickey, you and I are the old guys here. We've seen this
Thank
time
you.
and again. It's time, now we're going to have this conversation. We saw with gun control, everybody said, now we're going to get somewhere on gun control, and of course we haven't. Do you see anything really changing?
I think I truly think if we have the conversations, it will help. I mean, when I did a column recently, and I talked to one of the judges. I talked to Hugh Clark, black judge who's been engaged in so many facets of city life, and he said exactly what Belinda said. He said we just do not talk about racial issues, and if you talk to whites, that's the case. It's a hard conversation. But I think we're a community that could do it. I truly do. And I don't know what the upside is, but I think we're open to that kind of discussion. And if we can sort of push the community a little bit, I think it can help. I mean, there's unanswered questions out there. I was thinking about this today. I still cannot get an answer to why, when blacks are pulled over by Lansing police, the arrest rate is much higher than for whites, and the searches are much higher. And I don't necessarily believe that the police are taking, inappropriate actions, but it's just the inability to even get someone to answer that question talks about the difficulty we have talking about race and racial issues, because some of them are very uncomfortable.
Yeah, why don't you start the preacher?
Well, no, I just think at the state level, I don't know if we've really had a conversation at all on race relations. I think it has boiled down to kind of community by community. It's a national issue that kind of trickles down kind of to the individual, really, and how much they want to take part in it and how much they want to address it.
I think a lot of people aren't aware of how far apart we are. When I hear intelligent, college-educated people say things like, what do these people want? Or when I heard this morning my friend Tim Barron say, oh, a black cast for Annie, that's terrible. We don't really appreciate how far we are apart in this society on this issue. Well, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you all, wish you all a very happy New Year, and the same to our audience. We will be back next week with a compilation show, the best of our shows.
Our
for
clip show.
2014. And then on January, whatever that is, January 10th or 11th, we'll be back with a brand new show. Thanks so much for watching.